When Carver thought about the maze, he could picture it very clearly. The thick green walls of leaves, the scuffed brown pathway that may once have been lawn, the iron trellis that was pulled across the entrance at 6 o'clock each evening. But apart from the fact that it had been somewhere in Roundhay Park, he could never recall its exact location. "Do you remember going to the park on Sundays, when we were kids?" he asked his sister one evening. "Once or twice. I don't remember liking it very much at all." "What about the children's fair?" He was pleased to see her smiling as she spoke. "The helter-skelter. Now I did like that." "Anything else?" he inquired, a little too eagerly. "No. What's the sudden interest, anyway?" She broke off suspiciously. "Nothing. No reason." Carver found himself feeling stupid and childish, as if there was something to be ashamed of in his questions. That night, at home in bed, the duvet rolled tightly around him, Carver closed his eyes and attempted to place himself back in the park. Not as it was now, faded, smaller, but as he remembered it, huge, ever-changing, packed with surprise, with key points of delight, whose presence guaranteed pleasure every time. He could see the black-watered boating lake with its moss-legged pavilion hovering above one end. Now he was at the cream and green bandstand that smelt of wee and wet tobacco. And then he was running through the maze, trailing his hand against the spiky twigged hedge to his left. Try as he might, he could not connect these locations together. He would flip from one to the other with no journey in between. Tomorrow he'd work a little harder at finding his way back. The home wasn't that bad. The nurses cared, the floors were clean. There was a bright sun lounge that opened last year, where everyone could sit and sip watery tea from the vending machine. Carver thought Dad was too young to be here. And really it was. But 2 strokes had left him needing constant nursing. Mum had managed with the first one, but the second came with her death, and the home had been the only real option. Dad, slumped to the left, made for one of the biscuits on the tray in front of him. "I was remembering the park, Dad, when we used to go on Sundays." Dad nodded, munching his digestive. "It was always cold, that place. The wind whipping round the trees." He remembered it. That was a start. "I was thinking about where we used to go." "Aye?" His father nodded again, releasing a few crumbs down his sweater. "The maze, Dad. Do you remember the maze?" "The maze." His father looked at the floor, and the edges of his mouth twitched. Was he smiling? Very slowly, Dad's eyes closed. "Dad." The only response came in drowsy respiration. On an impulse, walking to the bus stop, Carver crossed the road. He decided to take the bus into town instead of back home. Then he could get another up to Roundhay. He took the number 10 from outside Lewis's that ran all the way to the park gates. It was funny to be on a bus journey that he hadn't travelled for nearly 20 years. To do it this way was like riding back to his childhood. Much had changed, but the topography remained the same. The terminus came at one end of the park's entrances. With a faint feeling of excitement, Carver dismounted and made his way in. It was a fine autumn afternoon. The frosty air was sharp with the dull tang of mud. The cries of children mingled with the calls of birds over the lake. The occasional skateboard roared across the car park. He passed the crumpled metal nets of bins and wandered off the concrete into the park to begin his search for clues. Sure enough, there was the children's fair up ahead. He paused at the miniature dodgems cowled for the winter and the little merry-go-round, its chair swings trussed up like game in a butcher's shop. The train wasn't here, but there was a line of slot machine rides. Carver closed his eyes and tried to imagine walking from here to the maze. He saw nothing. Then he wondered if he might look suspicious skulking around the children's rides in his overcoat with his eyes pressed closed. Frustrated and embarrassed, he opened them and moved on. Although there were other people about, the scale of the park made it feel quite empty. People stood out as spikes on distant hills, or moved quickly past, trailing dogs and children. The lake lay up ahead, preceded by a rolling incline. There was the pavilion, which had recently been converted into a waterside cafe. Could the maze have been up here, an added attraction after taking a boat? Ducks pulled rippling V's across the brackish water. He knew it wasn't at this end. He felt like stamping his feet. How could he be so sure about where it wasn't and not know where it was? On his way back to the bus stop, Carver fought off despair. The maze had been here. He knew it had been here. Perhaps what dismayed him was the fact that he had so few people to ask if they too remembered. There must be other options, official channels, public records. He looked at his watch. He had time to get to the library before it closed. The bus ride back to town touched Carver with sadness. He had travelled here in expectation of reaching something, only to discover there was no entrance available. He remembered the front of the maze the last time he'd seen it. The dark iron padlocked gate, strange against the rich green of the leaves which encircled it. He'd asked Mum why it was closed in the middle of the day. She'd mumbled something about a boy being hurt. How could you be hurt in the maze? He'd wanted her to take him round, lead him to the park bench in the middle, lift him up to drink from the water fountain that stood at its side. But she didn't. Not ever again. He couldn't remember when they went to the park after that. Hurrying down the hedgerow, his collar up to keep off the rain, Carver glanced at his watch. It was almost 5:25. Passing the squat blocks of the art gallery, he ran towards the ornate shelter of the library buildings. Breathless from his sprint through the rain, Carver had to take the steps slowly. They doubled back on themselves, making little landings as they rose, and at each corner was carved a chunky stone griffin, clinging fiercely to the banister. The reference library was right at the top, softly lit behind heavy swinging doors. Carver passed inside. His heart was still thumping at speed, fueled by nervousness and a touch of excitement. The roomy silence only added to the difficulty of speaking to the untidy young librarian, intent on his computer screen. I'm trying to find out about Roundhay Park, about its history. Without looking up, the man directed him through a passage that ran behind his desk and told him to walk right to its end. The narrow corridor seemed out of the public domain, but then, unexpectedly, it opened out into shelves and shelves of books. The passage continued amongst the bookcases, ending at another room without a door. Local History read the sign over the entrance. A large woman in a pink cardigan smiled at him as he entered. He wandered towards her desk. I'm trying to find out about the history of Roundhay Park, particularly the maze. The woman smiled and gestured to him to sit down. As she did so, Carver noticed with an unpleasant little jolt that 3 fingers were missing from her left hand. He found himself terribly excited. The prospect that he might have his memories confirmed so directly promised a feeling of great satisfaction, as if the hole he had observed growing within him might be about to be filled. The woman returned with a small number of items. She looked at her watch as she spread them out before him. If there's anything more you want, just come and ask. The first book he picked up was a tatty pamphlet produced in the 1980s. Carver flicked through its thin pages, eagerly scanning the pale grey photographs and text for a hint of the maze. There was none. A little desperately, he picked up another book, Roundhay Park, A Complete Record. It was dated 1897 in faded gold type on its spine. There was a set of engravings clustered in the centre. The waterfall, the folly, the old mansion house. No maze. Fighting tears, he pulled across the last item, a cardboard-mounted section of an ordnance survey map. He could make out various landmarks from their shapes, the bandstand, the cricket pitch, the old refreshment rooms. His eyes jerked back to the cricket pitch. There was an oblong shape at its edge that he didn't recognise. Could that be it? What he really needed was an aerial photograph, or any collection of photographs. He was sure they kept them somewhere in the library, maybe away from the public section. The large woman was tidying things on a desk. Carver hoped that he wasn't too late. I was really hoping to find out what the maze looked like, where it was located. Would there be any photographs, anything that might show that? He was aware of the tremor in his voice. She picked up her glasses with a crippled hand and went round a corner. After a moment she returned with a card. We haven't much time. Come on, she said a little conspiratorially. Carver had difficulty keeping pace as the woman walked ahead, briskly taking a twisting path through the warren of book-lined shelves. They passed down a small flight of steps into a lower-ceilinged room. The light was dimmer here, the air stale. The woman paused at some shelves. As she reached down, Carver realised they disguised a door. The bookcase swung inwards, and they walked through. They were in a small stone-floored corridor with a spiral staircase just visible at the end. The woman handed Carver the yellowed card reference. "Downstairs, love, but you haven't got long." She turned and walked back through the door. The staircase was surprisingly long, so Carver was relieved when he reached the dim, musty-smelling corridor that lay at its bottom. The corridor curved round slightly as it progressed, so he was unable to see where it ended. Iron doors were visible on both sides. The doors had white numbers painted on them in a rather fussy italic script. 720.5.9 read the first, 720.6.0 the next, then 720.6.1, 720.6.2. Carver realised with a little shock that this was his card reference. Tentatively, he pushed open the door. His legs went suddenly weak, and he almost slipped down the 3 small steps that led into the chamber. It wasn't the smell that so disturbed him. Dry yet earthy, like a pile of autumn leaves brushed into a garage and left to moulder until spring. No, it was the thing that faced him so impossibly that set his heart thumping and brought a jagged taste of metal into his mouth. He leaned against the wall, staring and breathing heavily, feeling the fusty air in his nostrils. It was brown now, not a hint of green anywhere. The leaves had thinned out, revealing a skeleton of iron rings beneath. There was no doubt. This was the maze, imperfectly preserved, but here all the same. Very slowly he stood upright and edged towards the desiccated hedge. The fence rails that were visible were brown too, rusted darker than the leaves. There was a gap between the hedge and the room's wall, just wide enough to walk down. As Carver did, he thought how peculiar it was to see the shrubbery, even in its dried-out state, against the shiny tiles. He held his breath when he saw the entrance. The trellis, less rusty than the railings, folded open around the darkness within. Breathing again, he passed inside. He turned the first corner, not caring if his route was correct. He was just happy to be back there. In fact, it was hard to remember when he had last felt joy like this. Another junction came, the hedge opposite him almost naked, the rails clear with branches twined round them. He was almost enjoying the idea of getting lost when he was startled by a noise some distance away. Someone else was there. Carver stopped moving and listened anxiously. The footsteps made it clear they were outside the maze. That was a relief. He wanted to be alone in it. In fact, when the trellis hinges groaned and squeaked as they were closed behind him, Carver felt himself moving deeper inside once again. Somewhere, far, far above, the town hall clock struck 6, while nearer, much nearer, a key twisted solidly in its lock.
Were you talking to?
A ghost.
Oh, shall I come back?
A mysterious village with magical tales.
Where did you come from?
You'll find out.
How?
Wait and see.
Stories of darkness and of light.
There is something about spring, isn't there? Something that compels you to wear your Sunday best on a Wednesday.
A new series of Radio 4's Curious Under the Stars.
Didn't think aftershave went off.
Available now on